Did anybody go?
Yeah, David said anyway. I'm
Sure, I'll take one.
Thank you. So I turn it on.
I've missed some things in the city.
Probably also file paperwork to.
We have copies.
But you never
Yeah, we
asked.
do.
It's too bad it's not
Is that
$1
cool?
bill. There you go.
You know, 4:30.
All jacked up?
So did you go on the board trip? You take
Did you
them?
go out to visit Country Hours?
Then we have two buses.
Everything set up?
The entire fifth grade.
How do you?
Oh, wow.
It's like,
It's almost 2 hours to get up there to bus,
Is it? Yeah.
door to door. And then pay for an
good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
hour and a half.
It is the appointed hour of 7 o'clock. And before I call this meeting to order, would invite anyone who wishes to address council under citizens' remarks to please sign in. Not required, but prefer that you do. And at this time, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And our first order of business, if you all will please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all and welcome. Glad that you're all here for the Thursday, September 21st edition of the Lexington City Council meeting. As we get ready to look at the agenda, one thing I will call on staff and council members is to please be sure to speak into your microphones. I've had some folks that have listened to the meetings and had some trouble hearing what you had to say or some of the discussion. So encourage our visitors and presenters as well as members of council to make use of the audio equipment. And with that, we have consideration of the agenda. If there's no objection from council, I'd like to move item 15.1, a presentation of a purchase and development agreement for 626 Waddell Street under presentations and make it 5.2. And if there's nothing else, changes or modifications offered by council, will adopt the agenda with that change. And I don't hear any objections. With that, I'd like to call on Jen Bell to introduce our friends from Davenport for their presentation. Good evening, Jen.
Good evening. Thank you. Davenport Public Finance has been working with the city manager and staff to help develop a sustainable capital funding strategy for the city of Lexington for the next 10 years to help us ensure that decisions we make today are beneficial to the city now and in the future. So after a series of meetings with staff and a work session with city council, Davenport has refined their recommendations for presentation tonight. So I'd like to welcome RT and Joe to present their findings.
Thank you for having us here this evening, members of council. My name is RT Taylor and my colleague Joe Mason. We've been working, as Jen said, over the past couple months with city staff to develop that sustainable strategic capital plan. We had this discussion last month. Good questions were asked. I think we got through those and everybody is on the same page and in sync with the programming here. For purposes of sharing with those that weren't here last time or for members of the public that weren't able to participate on last month's meeting, we want to go through some of those details, which you have an updated book in front of you. Again, it's mainly the same information, just a slight few tweaks with an addition of an executive summary up front. So if you'll bear with me, I'd like to jump in starting on page 5, the details of the presentation. We're going to skip over the executive summary for a minute. I want to just go through and highlight a few of those key points or details that we talked through last time. We've been doing on page 6. Again, page numbers in the bottom right-hand corner. We've been doing the capital planning, developing the appropriate models and tools to assess the current fiscal health of the city and determine how you are with respect to best practices and with your own financial policy guidelines that are adopted. Tonight, you'll hear a couple items that we are recommending making tweaks to or additions to in your current adopted policies. And we would anticipate those getting adopted or implemented in the fall if that is y'all's wish. Page 7. Again, we're developing this sustainable strategic plan in conjunction with the help of city staff. And again, we want to make sure that as we're programming out for the next 10 years, the plan is sustainable and meets best practices for the industry. On page 9, again, just doing highlights here. If you have any questions at all, feel free to stop me or interrupt me. We can keep this conversational. Page 9 is really a summary page that the upshot says that the city is well run, it's fiscally maintained healthily, and that we are in good stead with respect to our fund balance, with respect to our debt. And we have a couple pages I'll highlight here shortly with respect to the debt capacity and debt affordability that we've been measuring in the strategic capital plan. If I could turn your attention to page 12. This again, we want to make sure as we're comparing ourselves to best practices in the industry and our own adopted policies, we want to have perspective, not just looking at Lexington in a vacuum, but we've done a full peer comparison of who you compare yourself to or other cities of the same population or budget size. And you can see right here on page 12 that City of Lexington's fund balance is healthy, and current policy is to keep that number at 20% of your budget. We'll be making a recommendation to move that up to 40% and taking the difference from the unassigned fund balance and creating a strategic capital reserve fund that will help us maintain and build that sustainable plan going forward. And that's that 40% policy. If you look on page 14, we've superimposed the recommended policy over top of that same graph. So you can see that you are still well within or meet that minimum policy standard.
There on page 14, that's incorporating our general fund or what we need to keep on reserve and the recommended strategic fund.
That's right.
Combination of
Yes,
two.
sir.
Thank you.
That's right. So if you look at page 15, this is your debt to your tax base or debt to assessed value of your tax base. Your policy level is 5%, which is in line with industry best practices. And you are currently at 3.2%. So you have what we would call debt capacity to be able to bring on debt and fund projects. So you're at a good, healthy level, and you'll see the green box there on that page references that we've looked at it over for the next 5 to 10 years, and you've got roughly $33 to $39 million in debt capacity as measured against your tax base. Similarly, on page 17, this is your debt service to expenditures. How much of your budgeted expenditures are being used towards your capital program and or debt? And currently you're at 8.9% and steadily dropping over the next decade. Your policy is 10%, and we believe that's a good level. That's not a recommendation we're looking to make at this time. So you have, again, good debt capacity to fund your programming over the next decade, roughly to the tune of about $16 to $26 million. We're not recommending you go out and issue those in any particular year. We're just trying to give you an order of magnitude, what is affordable or capacity that you have over the next decade. And then lastly, on page 19, this is a measure that the credit markets tend to look at to see how quickly or how slowly you're paying your principal back. It's called the 10-year payout ratio. The city currently does not have a policy with respect to this ratio, and one of our recommendations is implementing a 10-year payout ratio just to make sure going forward we grow at a good fiscally responsible pace.
And is there a ratio that you are recommending, or that'll be forthcoming?
Oh, yes, sir. The minimum, the industry standard minimum would be right at 50%, which is where y'all currently are. So y'all would meet that standard as soon as we put it in place.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you for the clarification. And then we've got the city's CIP on page 21. It's really in summary level. We know that under each of these categories, there are a multitude of projects that we are looking to fund over the next decade. If you turn one more page to 22, in particular, we know we have the DSS building that the city of Lexington has agreed to issue the full amount of what that project will be, but then we'll share in those costs with both Buena Vista and Rockbridge County. So we've analyzed the portion that the city would be responsible for within our analysis. We've taken that into account. And then I'd like to flip real quickly to page 24. This gets into a little bit of more of the meat and potatoes of how the funding plan is sustainable and will work into the future. After layering in these capital projects and the related obligations, we show here the gold line is your current 24 budgeted debt service level is that dotted line. We pop above that, but we're planning to use some of those strategically set aside reserves to help shave those peaks to stay within our affordability of what we're currently at 8.9% of our debt service budget. So we want to keep at that level and shave those peaks as we bring on some of these projects. And then if you look at the next page, page 25, part of making this plan sustainable is not just setting aside those one-time monies and then spending down the cookie jar. Part of the plan is to take 2 cents out of the real estate taxes and use that as resources to meet these new obligations that you'll have in the coming 10 years. And we've shown that the program can be accomplished as laid out currently with the one-time monies and combined with that 2%, that 2 penny real estate tax equivalent.
Would that be a 2 cent increase?
Yes, sir. That's our understanding. If you can go the other way and find it in the budget, it's just the equivalent of those 2 pennies. Yes, sir. And then lastly, I think just going over some of the summary and recommendations that start on page 26 to highlight a few of those things that I refer to as the city is run very well financially. You've really built your fund balance up over the past several years. You've contributed roughly $1 million toward paying out of pocket for projects each year on average over the past 5 years, about $1 million per year. And you're in compliance with all of your adopted fund balance and key debt ratio policies. And then on page 27, just to continue the summary and recommendations, again, we recommend dedicating that 2 pennies on the real estate tax rate, whether it's an increase or found within the current budget toward capital programming over the next decade. We also recommend you have some funds that are set aside under general government services, roughly $5.2 million, that those would be used and set aside potentially for water and sewer projects. A little bit on that real quickly. We are working with the Maury Service Authority. They have, we've been doing some planning and modeling for them. And Jordan's here this evening. We will have that analysis done this fall and be able to come back to you early calendar year 24 with your analysis on the water and sewer side of your, call it not the non-tax supported side. You got the general fund, which is tax supported, and then the water and sewer system, which is supported by those revenues. We've got your analysis building that up sort of contemporaneous to the work we're doing with MSA. But we want to make sure we understand fully how that impacts the city of Lexington's water and sewer finances. Okay, so we'll come back with you after we get all the general fund stuff wrapped up. And then lastly, to maximize your funding options, expand your pool of potential investors to drive down your financing costs for some of these projects over the next decade. We're going to be recommending that we go ahead and proceed with, as we discussed at last month's meeting, getting our credit ratings back. The city has historically had credit ratings. They were withdrawn after you paid off some debt. That's a standard practice. If you don't have public debt outstanding, the rating agencies withdraw their ratings. So we're just talking about reinstituting those ratings, getting the good reports ahead of the budget season next year for our, because they provide a lot of good information in the write-ups. And that will help guide us and be good information to use as we go into the budget season this coming year, as well as when we go to issue our bonds next year for the DSS building and other projects. So with that, I would just either open it up to questions or turn it over to my colleague, Joe.
Members of council have questions for the team up here. But while you're pensively thinking, just to affirm on page, I think it's 15,
Yes, sir.
city compliance with key policies, debt to assessed value.
Yes, sir.
Again, just affirming what I'm reading. In 2022, you took our taxable real estate at 602 million. So
That was it.
churches, universities, they're not included.
That's right. And we do work with other local governments similar to y'all that have a strong institutional presence,
Mhm.
which is viewed by the credit agencies as a strength.
Right.
But you do have that offsetting, your tax base is sort of hemmed in a little bit, let's say.
Yeah.
But it's both a credit strength and it just reduces how much you
Right.
can measure against your assessed value.
And you're not taking into consideration any current or future commitments from the universities or the institutions as far as contributions or payment in lieu of taxes. This is just strictly looking at our real estate and running those numbers.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay.
sir.
And the 2% in 2023 and beyond, is that the assumed appreciation?
That's correct.
Okay.
Then just you're looking at your historical growth in your tax base, that's the natural growth. You know, there are some years where you have a revaluation. And so we try not to give the full credit of that reval year. We try to pull it out and look at what the true natural growth is between years. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. So folks that renovate and improve a home that may have been on the books for 200,000 becomes 300 is a bonus. And any future projects, apartments or other development in the city would also be just enhancements on top of this.
You got it.
Very good. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Council members have any questions?
Was the revenue sharing agreement with the county, Rockbridge County, included in any of these numbers, in terms of revenue?
No, sir. In a way it was.
Okay.
Okay. We did that by way of discounting their portion of the project and looking at the portion that would be applicable if you issued the debt that you're on the hook for, so to speak. You're 20%. Jim can correct me.
I think Councilmember Betts is referring to a revenue sharing agreement with Rockbridge County whereby, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Betts, but whereby they provide a percentage of their revenue to us annually.
Yeah.
It was part of an annexation agreement several decades ago. We agreed not to annex, and they give us an annual apportionment of their revenue.
Got you. So that hasn't been backed out of here. We've used what you currently have in showing your finances. So if those revenues are included in your current revenue stream, that's what would be in the financial analysis. Related to the debt, we are assuming that you're only paying the portion that that's attributable to the city of Lexington.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Jim.
Any other questions? If there are no other questions, just to affirm the timeline in the back here, to shape expectations,
Oh, yes, sir.
Let me
You
find
want
the
me to go through
page.
that?
but just, we're looking at the proposed, policies that you've provided to us. And, I said,
It's page 28. if you're
Thank
talking
you.
about the
Yes.
timeline.
yeah,
Yes, sir.
looking at, calendar year 2023 for us to consider adopting and or amending the financial policy guidelines, but if you can speak to those.
Sure. So we would imagine after this meeting, if y'all had any other questions or comments regarding what we've presented and discussed so far with respect to the plan, we would implement those changes, but bring back to you sort of the revised adopted policies as we're recommending and have those marked up for you to consider for adoption maybe at next month's meeting, if that works for you all schedule. And then that would be done before we go to the rating agency. So that's all firmed up and we can speak to them. That's something that's in transition rather that the city council has fully adopted.
Very good. So there'll be more work to do in the fall here at a minimum. Mr. Ziegler.
So if we adopted the recommendations, though, we're not handcuffing ourselves, saying that we're going to raise taxes 2 pennies. We're essentially saying that we want to be able to find in the budget going forward, $134,000 that increases a little bit each year that we can dedicate to capital projects. So the other levers at our disposal, like increasing meals tax, other, if we decide not to pay other entities' debts, so we can pay our own debts, we have other opportunities to potentially come up with that $134,000. So I just want to be very clear that their recommendation is 2 pennies on the tax rate, but it'd be hard to look at our taxpayers in the eye and have that be the narrative when we have $1 million surplus or a $2 million surplus in the last few years. So I just want to be very clear that it's only recommendations to come up with $134,000 if we do this. Is that right?
If I could clarify, I would completely agree with you. The recommendation emphatically is not 2 cents on the tax rate. It's raising the appropriate revenue to fund the debt service, however you find it within the budget.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Well, we know where to find you, and we're grateful for you making the trip out to Lexington. I hope you had dinner and left some tax dollars behind to help us with this operations this year. But that's right. Grateful for y'all being here.
And I think the only thing we'll work with staff to figure out if the next month's council meeting would be the appropriate place to bring that revised financial policy guideline document back to you with call it the red line version, so you can see where the edits are made or recommendations are made. That way if that's the right meeting, we can get that done and reach out to the rating agencies to get those meetings on the calendar.
Very good. Yeah, Mr. Smith.
Quick question. How long does it take to get a credit rating?
It takes a little bit of time to get the presentation materials together that they like to see from us that we provide to them. They're always very complimentary how we put them together with our clients. And so that's going to take about 30 to 45 days to get everything coordinated, get people's schedules coordinated, and get sort of on the books with a meeting with the rating agency. So once we get the sort of go ahead from you all, we'll start getting that undergo.
Is the goal to get rated with one agency or multiple?
Recommendation would be to get it, maybe visit with all 3, get the reports back in draft form before it gets released to the public, understand what the pros and cons of the different rating reports are, and then potentially select 2.
Okay.
So you have 2 agreeing, not just one out there by itself. Yes, sir.
I can add. So all the agencies offer a process of what they call a shadow rating, which is in their nomenclature, sort of something where they basically do everything except for the final details of the rating report. And they're able to give you an indication of where in the rating spectrum you'll fall. And then they can produce, as RT said, a draft report. And then we as a collective team can determine which ones to take. If they're all the same, maybe we only take 2, maybe we take all 3. If there's a variation, we can pick and choose. That's the advantage of it, because it's not, once they publish the rating, it's published. But if you do the shadow rating process, then you can stop short and say, okay, we don't want this one or we don't want that one, because it wasn't what we expected.
And the other potential requirement by investors may be that within their portfolio, they may have to have more than one rating. So it would fit more to the point last time, it would increase your pool of investors. Yes, sir. Mr. Allgood.
What do you expect would be the end result of the ratings for us based on what you see so far? Just your estimate.
I believe it's good to say that y'all would fall within a strong AA category.
AAA being the highest, AA category being right below that.
Yes, sir.
mean, it's a very strong rating.
And of course, just to put words in your mouth, the shadow rating, if it came back perhaps triple B across the board, we may not pursue and embrace a rating if we were expecting a double A.
It won't,
Right.
but yes.
Gotcha.
And since I'm not an investment banker, just to clarify, when you look at slide 12, which is unassigned percentage of general fund revenue, just again, for the sake of conversation for free free education. Kind of at the bottom of that chart, you've got the city of Waynesboro that has a very small percentage of an unassigned general fund revenue, very, very small. On this chart, we're one of the better ones on that chart. Yet Waynesboro has a double A, give or take, double A rating. So I mean, just what will it be worthwhile to even spend the 45 or 50,000? I'm just trying to, again, make sure that we're not going down a path that for a city that says we have 7,000 residents, but we have probably more like 4, because a lot of them are college students, because we're definitely out of our league a little bit on the list of Virginia cities and municipalities.
So if you look back in the appendix, if you will, it's page 22. Okay. I'll wait till you get there.
Yeah.
So just take your
I'm
time.
there.
All right. So again, historically, Lexington has had ratings. The only reason it was withdrawn is because you paid off your publicly outstanding debt.
Okay.
That's in the public markets. There are 38 cities in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Virginia Beach being the largest at a population of 460,000, the smallest being city of Norton, which to your point, they're only 3,600. And some of that 7,400 or 7,500 for the city of Lexington may be students. But the point is, out of those 38 cities, the other 37 cities, aside from Lexington, 30 of them have 1 or more credit ratings. So again, that's speaking to the fact that it doesn't matter what your size is, but if you're going to be looking to get proceeds for your projects, getting the ratings helps you increase your investor pool and drive down the long-term interest rate that you're going to be paying over time.
Great. Thank you. Just again, I know you explained that at the police station, and I just, again, wanted to be sure that my understanding that it's worthwhile to go down this path. And then we would look to city staff if we initiate this, where that money comes from in FY24. But that's for us to figure out.
Yeah, well, I think the money can come from a couple of places, and it's purely a policy decision on your part. You can pay for it out of an appropriation out of the budget, or what the overwhelming majority of local governments do is when they go to borrow money, the rating cost, the cost that you pay the rating agencies is a cost of doing business, and that cost is folded into the loan, if you will.
Okay.
So you're, as a local government, not quote unquote out of pocket. Yes, you're paying for it over time, but it's not something that's going to impact your budget immediately. The other thing that I would add, just going back to your comment, which I appreciate on the size of the community. For a number of years, I worked for Fitch Ratings, one of the 3 major rating agencies, and I can tell you, I covered the entire Eastern Seaboard at one point, and there are dozens upon dozens of towns in New England and New Jersey and New York that are of your size that have credit ratings, and they get them primarily for the purpose of lowering their cost of capital. So size doesn't matter in this context.
Thank you.
Very good. Gentlemen, thanks for the insights and the education and the good work on behalf of our citizens as we navigate providing the services and facilities to keep Lexington a charming, lovely place to live. So
Thank you for having us.
That it is.
thank you. Safe travels. Next on our agenda under moving new business and a presentation regarding the purchase and development agreement for Waddell Street. And I'll ask city manager to introduce this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council. As has been anticipated for some months, we now have a presentation before us this evening from Echelon and Urban Core. I believe Mr. Andy Beach from Urban Core had intended to be here, but he had some family obligations. And so we have Randy Cosby representing both Echelon and Urban Core. The purpose of this time together tonight is one, to see the presentation, which is a concept of the development that has been developed by Echelon and Urban Core. It is a concept only. The second part of this is to look at the legal agreement that has been reached. There's some minor tweaks to it, but 99%, I'll let the city attorney touch on that, but we're 99% there. There's no real issues at all, but there's just a few little tweaks that Mr. Carroll can explain. So we'll go ahead and start out with Randy doing the presentation, and then you'll have time, of course, for many questions. This is just for your purpose this evening. It's not a public hearing. I would recommend that a public hearing be scheduled at our next meeting on October 5th. And then after the presentation, if there's any, again, questions about the actual legal agreement, either Mr. Carroll or I can attempt to answer those. I would note that one change that's significant enough to mention is that in the concept plan that shows the actual site, you'll see at the end of the parking area off to the side, left-hand side, there's a parcel that says City of Lexington. That's an excess piece of property that we've had for decades with absolutely no use. And we had discussed before making that available to the developer here, whoever that developer was, because why leave it for another few decades with no use? So I've asked Mr. Carroll to include that for the public hearing next meeting, October 5th, so that can be disposed of at the same time, potentially, as the VDOT properties. It just makes sense to add it to the site from my perspective. So the other things I'd just like to note before letting Mr. Cosby start is that what we looked at in this proposal and in this legal agreement was the desire you have for development of the parcel. And it's not to sit there for any long extended period of time, but try to get it developed as soon as reasonably possible. That it should be mixed use in nature. It should be primarily residential. That's been the need identified for longer than I've been here, 5 years plus perhaps. It provides housing accessibility for lower income working residents, and that this proposal does that. It affords some housing for people who are 80% AMI or less. It achieves a good density and efficient use of the site. We're trying to increase our density both in the residential and in commercial fashion, which is why it's mixed use. It limits the impacts of any offsite, limits offsite impacts. It's a very responsible plan so that the neighbors don't see any negative or very limited negative impacts. And it complies with the spirit of our city zoning code. I say that only because we haven't gone through all of the zoning yet. That's not the phase we're at. And as I said earlier, it is a good neighbor to the surrounding properties. So those are the underlying things we hope to accomplish, feel we did accomplish with the proposal and with the legal agreement. So with that, unless there's questions, I'll turn it over to Mr. Cosby so he can do his presentation.
Hey, good evening, members of council. Randy Cosby with Echelon Resources, principal with the development team. Apologies, Andy Beach couldn't make it tonight. I think you've all seen and are familiar with the rough framework of our proposal for here and for Spotswood. I'm going to run through the slides pretty quickly, try to hit the high points, make you aware of any changes, and leave time for questions. So we're talking about the 5.5 acre property on Waddell Street, the old VDOT site. This is a joint venture between Urban Core Construction and Echelon Resources. Urban Core is a Class A commercial general contractor. They primarily build multifamily, and the two principals there, Andy Beach and Jeff Bunch, they have their own portfolio of rental properties. And then Echelon Resources is Edwin Gaskin and myself. We focus on primarily residential development, ground up, and historic rehab, mostly infill development. Talks about the need for housing in general, particularly affordable housing, workforce housing. Target market for this project, from our perspective, includes the working professionals, regional retirees, and potentially some young families will have a few 3-bedroom units. What we're proposing on the Waddell Street site is a 3 to 4 story apartment building or buildings up to 200 units. And we'll be reserving 20% of the total unit mix for folks making 80% of the area median income or less. And then I think the key, the biggest thing that we heard from the input that we received was the need for a commercial space. So we've reserved 5,000 square feet of first floor commercial, and we intend to put that right on Waddell Street. Our goal is to have kind of a neighborhood market, and we're hoping to find a local operator we can work with there. We've actually proposed some public green space on the site. That was something that we've also heard, and that is and the tentative concept plan that's along the parcel 2, which is something that's going to be retained by the city. We'll have kind of our standard Class A amenity package. I do not think we'll be doing a pool here, just because I don't think that that's the right fit. But we'll have full fitness center, club room. I'm sure we'll do a pet spa, have a place to walk your dogs. And one of the things that we're most excited about with this and Spotswood is just how pedestrian and bicycle friendly both of these sites are. This outlines a few of the developer obligations. We've got a maximum 18-month due diligence period, and we will be rezoning the property during that time. We've got to submit our zoning no later than 12 months after execution of the contract. And we have to submit our site plan approval no later than 120 days after non-appealable zoning approval. We're required to begin construction of the site within 12 months after conveyance, and complete construction of at least the first phase, which has to include a minimum of 75 units within 24 months after the start of construction. City obligations primarily, allow for our entitlement period, provide an Alta survey. I think they've got to provide a current title package, and then reimbursement of tap fees. This highlights projected. This was a cost benefit analysis using the city's cost benefit spreadsheet template. I think this was provided by Arnie. This doesn't take into account meals tax or obviously tap fees or some of the other things. So I would say it's a conservative estimate, but this shows you kind of a high-low range if we do 150 units versus 200 units. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 million for the first 10-year period for the 150 units, or a little over 5 million for 200 units. And then we're estimating an annual tax revenue of 375 to 500 grand. Current concept plan. I think the couple things to point out here on the left side of the screen, there you see some nose in parking. That is going to be a city-owned parcel. So if you look at just the survey, that's identified as parcel 2, and that's going to be retained by the city. We plan to improve that and install some parking there. We've spoken with the adjoining owners, George Hugie, and then the Commonwealth Environmental folks, and we understand that we need to coordinate with them on access. I know Mr. Hugie needs to get tractor trailers in and at his site. So that's something that is top of mind. And then we have not incorporated yet, but intend to incorporate the triangle piece on the bottom side of the screen that says City of Lexington on it. Along the left side of the screen where you see park and the highlighted green space, that's the public green space that we're proposing. And then the red area, the orangish area, is the 5,000 square foot commercial space, which again, we hope is some sort of neighborhood market.
A couple of questions. One, with the scheme that you have there, the drawing, are the commercial spaces attached or part of the other housing?
This is all vertically integrated into the building. So they're on the first floor of that building.
Gotcha. And when you said 5.47 acres, 5.5 acres at the beginning, I know a little bit conceptually, that is not including parcel 2,
That correct. That should not include parcel 2.
nor the triangle that you mentioned as well.
I don't believe that includes the triangle.
Okay. I just get nervous when we talk about 5.47 and then we have it outlined. It may or may not add up,
Mhm.
and just want to make sure we don't
I think
You're-
Jeremy might want to.
Yeah. speak to that.
The 5.47, one of the changes that Mr. Hallis was referencing is we're converting the original draft of the agreement had a fee simple being provided with regard to lot 2. That's in the 5.47. We are adjusting that so the fee is not being conveyed for lot 2. The city's going to retain lot 2. Once you pull lot 2 or parcel 2 out, it would come down to 5.3 acres, but then we've got to add back in the city of Lexington triangle there.
And
so that'll
I'm
bring
not
it
sure
back
if
up.
this, I don't believe the survey identified the acreage of that
It did not-
triangle.
It did not. You're
Right.
correct.
Is to that point, is there any change in the sale price related to the, okay.
Thank you.
On the conceptual layout, the other thing just to highlight is just kind of the acknowledgement of the easement along the right side of the property for school access. We also added in as part of the purchase contract project expectations exhibit a buffer. There's a landscape buffer between us and the school.
Could I just ask, so you said the goal is to get a neighborhood market in one of those spaces. There's another portion that I guess would be open for other businesses, or?
Yeah, the section on the right is highlighted as it's a ground level amenity, so club room, fitness center.
Okay.
So we always like to at least acknowledge that that's going to be part of the building. So we could shift these around, but if the park's on the left side, we thought kind of tying that public space with the commercial use would be a good idea. I think the key is getting the commercial use out on that Waddell Street frontage.
Absolutely. Very good.
Just wanted to touch on this. I think everybody's aware we're the contract purchasers for the Spotswood project. That's 62 units. And Jim, I would need to go back and check our notes, but we've been we first submitted a proposal for that quite a while ago. Maybe it was 3 years ago or even longer. So on these two projects, I think the main thing that can help us is time. You know, we're in the tightest credit market that we've been in for at least 15 years. We've had rising construction costs that have leveled out. We've even seen some start to come back, decrease a little bit. But you know, Lexington is not unique in that, you know, it's just the project. It's just our project here that's impacted. All of the projects across our portfolio are certainly impacted, and so we are planning to link these two together. We would still build Spotswood first, but in terms of timing and entitlements, we plan to kind of catch the VDOT project up to Spotswood, slow Spotswood down a little bit, and you know, hopefully we can catch the falling interest rates.
Did Joe and RT tell you when that was going to be?
No, I've got their card though, so I'm going to grab
Good.
them after the meeting. That's it for the presentation. Happy to do my best to answer any questions.
Member Council, Mr. Smith?
This may have been covered in the work session that we all had together, but just for clarification, everybody else out there, what process will you all use? And I know this is down the road, but what process will you use to certify that the 80% AMI applicants meet those criteria?
That's a great question. I think the answer right now is that it's undefined. Other than that, if we go with, like, for example, VHDA, they have a program that allows you to access a slightly lower interest rate if you commit to that 20% at 80% AMI. So in that case, VHDA would be the third party oversight. If we were to not use VHDA and go with some other financing source that didn't have any oversight, then we would be responsible for, generating some sort of report. We could do that annually and submit that to the city. We're open to however you all would want to navigate that.
Thanks.
Mr. Ziegler.
Also to ask a question that we talked about during that work session, and again, down the road.
Sure.
At times, we've talked about the importance of having a property professionally managed. Sometimes we say on site, the importance of that, what that might look like. Are you able to just, again, I know you've talked about this and Mr. Gaskin has, but just kind of share the current thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we would have a full-time, probably property manager and leasing agent and maintenance technician, at least for this size property. And they would be on site.
Thank you.
Mr. Alligood.
Over time, what would be your estimate of the number of units for both Spotswood and the VDOT property availability versus time?
Are you asking how many, I thought what you were going to ask is how many units would we be leasing a month? But I think what you're asking is roughly how many units would be available each month if somebody were to be looking for an apartment. Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. Well, we hope that we stay pretty full. Usually I think across our portfolio, we're probably 97% occupied on average throughout the year. So we might have, we have a, I guess if we were 5% vacant, we'd have 10 units open at all times.
And then related to that is as construction occurs, you're not going to have the 62 plus the 150 to 200 available at the same time. What would be the availability, the number of available units that you project versus time for both those projects?
Got it. So you're saying once they're built and stabilized, how many units would be available on average each month?
No.
I think the question he wants to get to is how do you plan to phase them in? Will you do
Yeah,
62? Will you
Yeah,
do
phase it.
Got it.
50?
Well, yeah, undecided right now. Largely it depends on our financing. We are not going to build VDOT before we build Spotswood. We know that. But our hope is that we can start with one and roll right into the next without really any delay. This is probably a 24-month build, maybe 30-month build between the two projects. So it'll largely depend on our financing, but we'll just have to see. We don't have a set in stone timeline on that, but we do know that we'll do Spotswood first.
Do you have a current projected cost per unit?
We do, and it's changing every day. I mean, our hard costs 3 years ago were just for perspective, were about 120,000 a unit. We've gotten quotes. We got a quote on a different project a few months ago that was 260,000 a unit, and they're not being built for that. Not in any markets in Virginia, outside of DC anyway. So, those numbers I think are a little inflated, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were in the, $150,000 to $170,000 a unit range. That's hard vertical cost, doesn't include site work or soft costs or construction interest.
Any other questions council members have? Well, Randy, we're grateful for you being here this evening. You're welcome to stand, or if you want to catch a seat and see if there are any
Thank you.
questions that council members have regarding the agreement with our attorney, or Jeremy, if you want to hit any high points.
I don't know if Jim's going to start or,
I was going to focus on what changed, which I already commented on briefly. The deed by which VDOT conveyed the property to the city contains a requirement that parcel 2 be continually used as ingress and egress to the parcels that surround that area. And so because of the way that deed is worded, we didn't think we could give a fee simple interest to Echelon. We had to retain control of it so we could preserve that ingress and egress. But we do think that the parking that Echelon has set out is consistent with that ingress and egress because it's not going to block the roadway. So we can basically use the parcel 2 for both purposes. So what we're structuring is, instead of giving them the fee, the amendments we're going to be making to the document you have are to create and this will be parsed out in the public hearing that we'll hold. We're going to give them whatever franchise or easement or right or privilege to use that property for the purposes of parking to the maximum extent that we can under the law. But under the Virginia Constitution, there are some limitations there where it falls short of, for example, being a permanent easement. So then, in addition to giving them as long of an easement as we can give them, we'll back that up with an obligation to maintain that parking after that easement expires. That's the main adjustment we're going to be making to the contract.
Will the contract have any language as granular as tractor trailer access or, okay.
It gets in maintaining ingress and egress, and that frankly comes from the VDOT deed to the city, ingress and egress to the adjoining parcels.
Okay.
And I think it will be maintaining it in the manner that it exists. I do think there is some consistency there about maintaining it in the manner in which it is currently being used.
And to a certain degree, for members of council and thinking about this or cogitating on it, when I was thinking about it, the Lyric is an example of where something like this is already in place. The old firehouse parking lot, there are spaces dedicated to the Lyric, but the city owns the parking lot. And the same sort of circumstance with the Roy Smith parking out here, where the county has designated parking spaces. We own the parking lot, but there are easements or agreements, or I'm not sure exactly the structure, but it would be conceptually similar.
It's conceptually similar. There is a compounding issue under the zoning ordinance. In order to use off-site parking to count towards the parking requirement to comply with the zoning ordinance, it has to be within 500 feet, no problem. And it has to be under a written agreement to use it for that purpose. And that's why we have to build it into this agreement that we're going to allow them to use parcel 2 for the parking.
Right.
One other minor edit, you heard discussion of the Alta survey. Because it is easier to prepare and produce an Alta survey by allowing the purchaser to deal directly with the surveying company, what we'll probably do with that is adjust it almost like the connection fees for the water and sewer. They'll obtain the Alta survey and then we'll reimburse them the expense of that through the IDA. So those are the kinds of adjustments that we're talking to the agreement. Beyond that, the presentation addressed most of the major highlights. The 18-month due diligence period, they can extend that due diligence period by 6 months if they pay an additional $10,000 deposit. They have to close within, or they have to begin construction within 12 months of closing. The purchase price is not adjusted to Nick's question. I know Jim had a few other highlights he wanted to talk about, but happy to address any questions you may have about the agreement.
Ms. Strawn.
You mentioned the connection fees. I didn't see that. I must have missed it. But so how are we handling the connection fees?
The sewer connection fees and the water connection fees are going to be under the Spotswood agreement, they were just being directly waived.
Right.
But the way we need to do that is to actually, they pay them and then we reimburse them as an economic development incentive grant through the IDA. And so that's how it's going to happen. They'll pay them, we'll reimburse them through the IDA.
Was that spelled out in the
Yeah,
contract?
yes,
Okay, I
ma'am, it
missed
is.
that.
And in fact, you heard discussion about trying to marry up Spotswood and the VDOT properties. We do have and have finalized an amendment to the Spotswood agreement to put them on the same schedule. And in addition, we've made that change to Spotswood, where instead of a waiver of the connection fees, we're going to make an economic incentive grant back to the developer through the IDA, which is consistent with what the Constitution requires for a grant from a locality to a private entity like that.
Mr. Ziegler.
Can you kind of share clearly, in return for a $10,000 deposit, the property is tied up for approximately up to 18 months?
$10,000 deposit is all that is being paid upfront, and they do have a study period of 18 months under the agreement.
And at the conclusion of, let's just say, 17 months and 30 days, 29 days, at that point, the sale would occur. Is that right?
It could occur. Obviously, impediments could arise where they walk
So
away.
what could such impediments look like at that point if the city does everything that we are obligated to provide?
The business climate doesn't improve and they're not able to get the financing that they need to develop. the
Right. So
project.
that's exactly, and I appreciate that. That's just what I was clearly trying to have articulated in return for a $10,000 deposit. Just purely.
The only thing I was going to add is they do have the option at that 18-month of adding an extra $10,000 deposit to extend it out 6 more months to see how the business climate, the financial climate improves or doesn't.
Okay, thank you.
Randy, did you want to respond or do you have a question?
No, I was just going to add to that there's a few milestones in there requiring us to submit for rezoning and site plan. So the city, should we not move forward for some reason, they'll be the beneficiary of the design and the studies and all the other stuff that goes on. And we can't get to those milestones without spending significant money. So even though the city's only getting a check for 10,000, we're much more invested in that.
And to Randy's point, you asked what could get in the way. There's nothing in this agreement that obligates the governing body to approve a rezoning. And so that could get in the way if a rezoning was rejected for some reason. And then they would have the opportunity to walk away from the deal.
And during that time, this body is going to change probably. As long as Echelon is doing all their part, once we agree to this proposal, the city is committed to this. Is that correct?
The committee has entered, the city has entered into the agreement, but there are steps in that process where there will be rezoning. There's going to be a rezoning from its current zoning to planned unit multi-use. That is a separate legislative process that has to go through the planning commission, subject to public comment, comes to city council. City council is not obligated because it is a separate legislative process to approve that rezoning. If city council were to reject that rezoning at that point, then in theory, the project goes away, but you have a good faith obligation to go forward with that process.
Thank you.
Is that process will be during the 18 months?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's 12 months to file the initial rezoning. Yeah.
And does the, clock start, so to speak, when we, make this agreement?
When we sign it.
Okay.
I think the effective date is signatures.
One thing to point out that was in language, I think in the Spotswood contract, and I can't remember the exact language, but something to the effect that the city would process a rezoning request in a timely manner. And some people interpreted that we would just approve anything that they brought forward. And the reality is we're obligated to handle it in a timely manner, as is our process. Sure.
In the language in the VDOT contract, we changed it a little bit. You're going to fully consider, in accordance with the Virginia Code and City of Lexington Code, any subdivision rezoning, conditional use permit, zoning text amendment applications.
Right.
You have obligations under the Virginia Code and City Code to address things in a timely manner. You can't just sit on them. You have to take them up and deal with them.
Right.
And so that's what you're obligating yourself to do. You're not obligating yourself to any particular outcome.
Correct. Thank you, Jeremy. Other questions that council has? Randy, I appreciate you pointing out the long journey that we've been on to get to this point. We've known Edwin a little bit longer as well, and grateful for the opportunity to work with your firm, having gone through the RFP with this. Excited for today and for the public hearing at our next meeting, October 5th. City Manager.
Yes, you're confirming, Mr. Mayor, that we will have a public hearing at our next meeting and council will consider this item at that point.
Yeah.
Thank you. We'll schedule that.
It'll be in the public hearing will be published, and the expectation that City Council will consider this matter at our October 5th meeting. So Randy, safe travels. Thank you for the presentation and the work up to this point, and look forward to you spending a lot of money and getting this built.
Yeah, we're excited about the long term. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Next item on the agenda is consideration of minutes. There were three sets of minutes in your packet. Any changes or observations? Hearing none. If there's no objection, we will approve them as presented. They are approved. Thank you, Janie. Next item is citizens' remarks and comments. And while Jim's looking, remind everyone, we welcome folks to address council. No one signed up, but is there anyone here who would like to speak to council this evening? Miss B, please come on up and pull that microphone where we can hear you loud and proud. And I know we have it, but if you could state your name and address for the record, please.
Beatrice Johnson, 205 Massey Street, Lexington, Virginia, 24450.
Thank you.
I'm here to speak again on the Randolph Street project, or lack thereof. I would like to know on behalf of my community, just what progress has been made and where we stand on that. I know you say we want to make sure all of the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, which we want also, but we don't want to take forever for those T's and I's to be dotted. We want to live to see that happen. And we would like to know what progress has been made, if any, and just where do we stand on this project? You speak of good faith and a good neighborhood when you was talking about Waddell project. Well, we are consider ourselves a good neighborhood too, and we want to say respect. And we would like to know just where we are on this project.
Ms. B, the next item on our agenda is actually an update from the city manager on 201 North Randolph Street. You may recall Councilman Ziegler felt it worthy to have and maintain on our agenda. And so at every meeting, we get an update from the city manager and staff, additional staff on the status of 201 North Randolph Street. So
Okay, thank you, Councilman.
And we will be getting an update from the city manager in the next item.
Okay, well, I just wanted to get that in there, and I'll be listening very attentively to hear what progress is being made and where we stand.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us, and thanks for keeping us focused on the neighborhood and the work and progress going on there. And with that, I'd call on the city manager for an update on 201 North Randolph Street.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. City staff and I have been working with the Clarks to stay in communication about what the next step will be. Frankly, they do want to demolish that building and they need a permit for demolition. Prior to getting that permit, they wanted to make sure their prices were firm and they had a contractor under contract who could do the job. So they will have that information, that application, I should say, to city staff the week of October 9th. So they need a couple more weeks and they'll have that to us. And then we'll process that permit. I didn't ask staff, frankly, how long it'll take to process it, but when we get it in our hands, we'll get it done as quickly as possible.
Mr. Ziegler.
So if that doesn't occur, what would be our next step? Since I think that this was originally brought to us and been on our agenda since April. And so that's when they first presented the petition in April. And so it's almost October. So what if the first week of October, there's nothing from the Clarks?
We would write a new violation. So all we can do is cite them for violation. Unless Mr. Carroll, our attorney, has any other thoughts on that.
There are blight remediation procedures spelled out in the Virginia Code. The other alternative is to pursue those, and I'll have to kind of research the details of them, but it involves an ordinance. It involves, again, notice and an opportunity for them to fix the problem. But then at the end of that, you demolish the property, you pay to demolish the building, and then you place a lien on the property and hope to collect it when the property is sold. That ultimately is your end game if the homeowner, if it qualifies as blight, and if at the end of the day, the homeowner doesn't take the opportunity to solve the problem.
Would the notice that's already been given,
I don't know. I'd have
Okay,
to look at it.
okay.
I don't think so. My guess is no, but I would have to double check.
Jeremy, do you think in the interest of good government that our council should develop a ordinance that maybe not for this property, but for a future property would be on the books and be existing? Because we've done that with sidewalks, if you will. We hadn't had an issue with people clearing their sidewalks, and then we did, and we realized we need to have an ordinance with some more serious teeth in it. And we went round and round about it. We hope to never have to use it, but it's there if we need it.
I know jurisdictions that don't have such an ordinance because the Virginia Code has some mechanism that allows this type of blight remediation. And I know others that do have the ordinance. And I don't know that the local ordinance is the easiest way, frankly, to carry out this process. Neither of them are terribly easy, but it actually kind of adds extra layers of work that you have to do. So under the Virginia Code, there's if it is an unsafe structure, and that's the threshold question. If it's an unsafe structure, then you can take steps to have it demolished without such an ordinance.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Alligood.
How does, if it does, this question, that property fit what we're asking, what we're attempting to do with the nuisance ordinance that we passed 6 months ago or so in there about the city taking responsibility for cleaning up particular properties in question?
I would actually have to go back and double check that ordinance. Mr. Alligood, I apologize. My guess is that there are, and I'm also not terribly familiar with the property. I just haven't studied it. Happy to do so.
Oh, sure.
But I'm sure there's, as I recall, there's mechanism in there for, again, doing work and placing a lien on the property.
Right, at city's expense and
At
placing
city
the
property.
lien.
It's all going to kind of unfold in that manner. Whatever the work is, you're abating the nuisance, you're then billing them, they don't pay, you put a lien on the property.
Correct. Thank you.
have they complied with the fencing requirements and such, the other requirements?
They have not, based on their willingness to move forward and get something to us quickly for the demolition. We have not wanted to force the fencing issue. We're hoping that they'll have it demolished soon. And so, putting some money into fencing doesn't seem to make sense at this point.
Okay.
The path of least resistance is a cooperative homeowner. And as long as you're getting some degree of cooperation, and Jim has recently, I understand, received some assurances that they're still proceeding. I think that's your best bet of getting it demolished sooner rather than later.
Ms. Alexander.
Yes, Jeremy, I guess this is a question for you. There's a state ordinance, but my concern is how do we as a city go about making sure that the properties that are issues are dealt with rather than having to wait for the community to come to us to say something? Would a local ordinance help that?
It could. I think really it's kind of boots on the ground, who's doing the inspecting, who's observing and calling these issues to the city manager's attention. I mean, it's got to percolate up somehow, whether when it percolates, we use a state statute or local ordinance. I can argue merits both ways, and we can certainly explore a local ordinance to kind of add some additional teeth. I think the first thing we'll do is go back and parse through the current code and make sure there's nothing in there that doesn't give us what we need. But beyond that, we can certainly explore a local ordinance.
mean, I think it's pretty obvious in some areas that there are some real issues. And I would hope that the city of Lexington citizens would think that we're paying attention to that and that we're proactive rather than reacting to complaints. And I don't know how to get there.
I do think the city, we need to keep in mind from the beginning, when a property comes up like this, we need to be realistic about can it be rehabilitated or not? And to me, that is the initial problem. I feel bad for the current owners. I feel like they have tried in good faith to do something with this property, but it was just too far gone. It was beyond their abilities and it's way beyond the value of the property. But from the outset, the original owner wanted to demolish this. And we pushed the city pushed them into trying to find an alternative for it, which was never going to happen, which now has led to this multi-year process where we have a dangerous structure there. So in the future, I think we need to look real hard. I know we want to salvage properties best we can, but I think we need to be realistic about it.
Right. And that was the ARB just not recommending it. The city never denied the demolition.
No, the city never did, but I think the owner of the property was reading the tea leaves and not getting good vibes and felt pressured into it.
And of course, if we're ever in a situation like this, if someone does do a application for demolition, and even if it is denied and they try to sell it after 12 months, they can still demolish it. Then they don't need permission to demolish it. So, I mean, just if we're ever in this situation again.
And be reminded that Threshold did go through a process of sending out letters to various owners of properties that we hope would work with us in regard to a renovation type project, but we didn't have success with that. Some of the homeowners are having deed issues and who really owns it and that kind of thing. But somehow, it just needs to be addressed. I mean, there are some houses that are sitting that are a danger to the adjoining properties, or there are people going into these empty houses and who knows what goes on. So it is just something that it's out there. And I would like to see us as a city be more proactive rather than reacting to something that happens.
I'm moving out of the city attorney role here, but I know other jurisdictions and you could probably learn from reaching out to, I have a personal experience. I know people in Danville who do blight abatement in Danville and they've got a very robust and aggressive program. It might be that you contact folks in other jurisdictions and see what they're doing on a administrator to administrator level.
Okay.
That's just, I'm just thinking, I don't know if that's constructive, but.
Well, along those lines, I wanted to weigh in on two things. There's several circumstances I would suggest around our community where neighbors work together when there is a blighted property or an issue, overgrown, things are reported to city staff and they pursue it and it gets rectified. They don't always jump everybody and come directly to city council as the petition that we received in April. And so from a process standpoint, I will always stand by know your neighbors and visit your neighbors. Sometimes people need some help. Sometimes people just need to be prodded to get a project finished. There've been some instances downtown with torn canopies on businesses, and it was just a matter, the money had been budgeted, been approved. The item just hadn't been ordered because the business owner hadn't ordered it. They got it ordered, the ripped piece was taken down and things moved along. But that was from neighbors talking to one another and saying, hey, do you need some help with that? But to your point, Ms. Alexander, there are some chronic properties and staff along the ways, I think with the prior attorney was working with policy to come up with, to deal with some of these blighted properties, don't know who owns it, taxes haven't been paid for years, and a way to work on that. And that's on the plate, but not perking up quite as quickly, but those become problematic. And the second thing I'd say emphatically, I don't know if everybody in this room knows the Clarks or has made an opportunity to meet the Clarks, but they have rehabilitated many houses in our community. They are very active in the real estate market. So it's not some shady character who's trying to drag down the neighborhood or be a bad neighbor. And Jim affirmed for me, if I recall, didn't Ms. Clark go before the ARB to seek authority or authorization to demo the building? So that piece, I don't think you reported tonight, but is important for B in the neighborhood to know that those steps that have taken place already.
That's correct. And as Councilmember Strawn said, originally, the ARB did deny the request to demolish. So now they have
7 years ago.
Yeah, 7 years ago. But they now have approved, so that avenue is open, whereas before it had been closed.
Prior to the Clarks being owners.
Correct.
there.
Yes, 7 years
It
ago.
was- They weren't even involved
Correct.
7 years ago.
Correct.
Correct. Previous owners.
Yeah, different owner, different day.
But the city has done and taken the steps, including the ARB recommendation or approval, to move this forward. So we have been moving diligently, if perhaps slowly.
Any other questions or comments relative to the 201 North Randolph Street? And Ms. B, I would just offer to you, anytime you want an update, we love for you to come and visit with us and inquire. But I also invite you to call the city manager and he can give you the latest and greatest of what's transpiring. But just to reaffirm, we expect that we'll have an application by October 9th from Ms. Clark to demo the building. She's working on finding quotes to get that taken care of and get that completed. Ms. B, if you'd come on up so we can hear you.
Do not mean to be combative with council. And as far as Mrs. Clark is in her, what all she has done for the community, well and fine, and we appreciate that. But right now, it's not well and fine with what the Clarks are doing to our neighborhood.
Thank you, ma'am. Next item on the agenda are reports and communications, and call on Mr. Smith for the Blue Ridge Resource Authority.
Blue Ridge Resource Authority met last Monday. The highlight was appropriating about $425,000 for a new track loader. That comes nets out with a about a $50,000 maintenance program and a $50,000-ish trade-in allowance. Any questions?
And how do we pay for it? Cash.
Well, paying cash. Any other
Planning
questions?
Commission, or I'm sorry, Main Street Lexington, rather.
No
Mr. Smith.
report.
Thank you, sir. Planning Commission, Ms. Strawn.
Yes, the Planning Commission met on Thursday, September 14th, and we had 2 items of business. We unanimously approved an application by Kimberly Hostetter for a certificate of appropriateness for new signage for Harmony Home Team by EXP Realty at 637A Waddell Street. And she will come back soon for approval of a street sign as well. And then here's the big news. We finished drafting the ordinance for accessory dwelling units. So we will have a public hearing for it on October 12th. And barring any significant changes based on the public comment, it will likely come before council in November. That's all I have.
Been working on that almost as long as we've been working with Echelon for real estate. So any questions for Ms. Strawn? Thank you for that report, and we look forward to seeing the accessory dwelling. Regional Tourism, Mr. Betts.
Yes, sir. Director of Tourism position, as of our last meeting on Wednesday, September 20th, 2023, there are 11 applicants for the Director of Tourism position. The application is still open. The Regional Tourism Board will have a closed session meeting on Wednesday, September 27th, 2023 at 8 o'clock a.m. to discuss the candidates for the Director of Tourism position. Visitors, facilities, and office space, both Lexington and Buena Vista's visitor centers are having maintenance issues. The Lexington Visitor Center has a recurring issue with the bathrooms related to the plumbing. Buena Vista Visitor Center has maintenance problems, including a smell from what is believed to be a dead animal under the building, and with one of the toilets sinking into the ground in the women's bathroom. The lease for the Lexington Visitor Center expires on February 28th, 2025. The committee to consider future locations for opportunities for the Lexington and Buena Vista Visitor Centers will meet on Wednesday, September 27th, 2023 at 9 a.m. in a closed session meeting to discuss potential visitor center locations. And then there was also a request at this meeting to have the financial directors from the three localities, Lexington, Buena Vista, and Rockbridge, to discuss how regional funds are held.
Very good. Any questions for Mr. Betts? Mr. Sigler?
Do you know what the rent is in Lexington and the rent in BV?
I can get back to you with those numbers. I don't know offhand.
Is BV zero? Is it minimal?
Pretty certain it's
Yes.
zero.
Yeah, zero. And then
Yeah, I
Lexington
think
is
Lexington's
like
in that
$5,000 or
$5,500 to $6,000 a month range.
just to,
I want to say that, yeah, that sounds to be
yeah,
about
just
correct, yeah.
thinking, I mean, so rent that facility for a lot of money, 60, 70,000 a year.
I think it's 60,000 a year as of, I think 2025. I think it's a little less than 60,000. So it's a little less than $5,000. I couldn't give you exact numbers, but I would say the Lexington facility is, I believe, a little less than 5,000 currently, and will escalate up to about 5,000
Thanks.
by 2025.
Nick, I promise I was listening, but if I understood you correctly, there are 11 applicants for the position,
Yes.
and the board will be meeting at 8 a.m. on the 27th
Yes,
to
sir.
review those.
Yep, that's correct.
And then will there be another step of selecting finalists?
We are not at that point, but I think we're going to discuss what applicants are
Available.
available and favorable in our view, and go from there.
Very good. Okay, and including just strictly the boards involved with making that selection.
The board, I believe Robbie has been helping us out with the human resources. So I believe he may be there for
Okay.
that meeting. For the 9 a.m. meeting, it's a 3-person committee currently, including one representative from each locality.
Mhm.
And we may have somebody come in and tell us about the facilities at 9 a.m., but that meeting's separate from the
Gotcha.
But
no one like county administrators, city managers are not involved in your hiring process.
no.
Okay.
No,
Very good.
that's my knowledge.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Any other questions? Raro, Mr. Ziegler.
No report.
Threshold, Mr. Betts.
I will keep this short. I will talk more about this maybe in the future, but I went to a VFC Access to Housing Committee virtual meeting on September 19th. It's very informative. A lot of topics, including community land trust and land banks, came up. And that was actually it was interesting. My understanding was, I guess some localities will purchase property and that's blighted and work with people, even including on estate issues. I guess maybe for the city to acquire it. It was an interesting discussion that was taking place. Of vacant property registries came up. There's a lot of different opinions on this. Some people like them, some people don't. Enforcement on existing codes and challenges to doing this effectively. In line with that, there was talk about a rental inspection program, which one of the challenges was that one locality said one inspector could do about 300 inspections a year. So when you think about that, that means that potentially it would cause a lot of staff requirement to institute a rental inspection program potentially. Reducing and eliminating parking requirements was another thing that came up of interest. Another thing that was pretty interesting was residential tax abatement, looking at potential tax incentives for folks to essentially redevelop blighted properties. Was a pretty interesting topic that came up. And you know, and I mentioned what we were doing here in Lexington with the you know, I didn't go into the application process, but that we're looking to do a windshield survey to assess our housing stock here in Lexington. So I tried to contribute in to some of the things we're trying to do here.
Very good. Members of council have any questions? And thank you for attending that Virginia First Cities seminar or webinar, and good partner in Richmond to work with. Thank you. Threshold, Ms. Alexander.
Yes, this is not about housing, but it's about contact that was made by the Virginia Department of Historic Resources to City Hall last month regarding the VDOT marker about Evergreen Cemetery that's located out on Route 11 bypass. And it references the old cemetery at Washington and Lewis Street intersection to determine if there was any support from the city to move it closer into the community. They have a file that contains information about the wording of the sign and the changes that were made at that time to make it more acceptable. But they said that the file does not mention why it was placed where it was. When the original intent, they said, was to place it on Route 60 at Nelson and Estill Streets. And I think I remember the backstory of this, is that the gist of it was that mentioning a particular intersection in a residential area could cause some security issues for the people who reside at that intersection, and did not want to call attention to that intersection so close to the residents a block away. So they wanted to know if we want to move it closer into the city. So an alternative consideration was made is, since it's about Evergreen Cemetery, that we place it near Evergreen Cemetery and not near that intersection where the old cemetery was, or anything like that in that proximity. But it should be possibly placed by the cemetery that's there currently, and to relocate the sign to that area. And after a lot of discussion with city staff and reaching out, it was agreed that that VDOT could move the sign, bring it to Public Works, and have Public Works start working on a site. And the potential site is on Evergreen Place, between the intersection of is it Evergreen and Central Road, and down at the entrance of the cemetery. So someplace in between there on an embankment is where this relocation is being seriously considered. Contact has been made with Rockbridge County Public Schools, and in working in conjunction with them and with Public Works, there are some approvals that have been made for both of those departments to work to keep that area cleared, to work to get it ready for receiving the marker, cleaning up the right of way, that kind of thing. So what we need to also do is for City Council basically to give it its blessing to make that relocation possible. And that's one of the requests from Historic Resources, is that their support for this to take place. So that's what I would suggest that we consider. They also want to have a rededication of that sign. They want to restore it before it's actually placed permanently. And it's it would be where VDOT would remove it and the city would keep it till it's restored and the city would install it. Any questions?
And the sign still references the original location.
It does. This is what the sign says. Original African-American cemetery near the intersection of Washington and Lewis Streets stood the original burial grounds for Lexington's substantial free Black community and slaves dating to the early 1800s. The majority of the original burials were in unmarked graves and no records were maintained of these burials. The town of Lexington obtained ownership of the cemetery in 1876 and closed it in 1880. And the persons buried there were purportedly moved to Evergreen Cemetery. Although there is little information to document the extent of the reburials. In 1946, the town of Lexington subdivided the old cemetery and houses were built over the burial ground. And I believe when this story of this sign came up from this gentleman from Stewart's Draft, who wanted to place the sign in about the cemeteries, there was, I believe, a lot of discussion back at that time about its location. And I don't know how it got to the bypass, but I don't think the city would give approval to put it close to where they wanted to put it. Does anybody remember anything about it?
My memory is foggy, but what I recall, and I hope is accurate, Brandon Dorsey was actually the one who brought this forward and wanted to place it at that intersection. Typically with these signs, there's a requirement to have parking, and there wasn't parking designated for it. And the other larger issue was the fact that there is no cemetery there currently, and they didn't want people exploring or looking for ancestors or things of that nature in people's backyards and trespassing on private property. And Brandon was determined to have it placed and worked with the county and had it placed out on Route 11. And where it is now. And I think within the past year, it was actually tipped and falling over, and we had VDOT reestablish it. And I think that placing it at Evergreen makes a whale of a lot of sense. So
I think the location sounds great. I just hope there's enough clearance between the road in somewhere that's accessible so you can read it. And yeah, getting to what Frank said about it being tipped over, because my neighbor had contacted me and noted that it was tipped over. So if it's too close to the road, it's going to get hit by something. So
When the site was checked, there was the consideration to place it up on the embankment some, and then there's a ditch before you even get up the embankment. And I noticed yesterday or today that they have worked to put a little section over the ditch.
Oh, good.
So that you can walk up to that sign. And across the street, there's a pull-off space. And you can actually see the sign if you enter or exit the back of CVS and Arby's.
Yeah.
Great.
And we need to be mindful that in discussions with our neighbors, Rockbridge County Public Schools, they at their expense cleared that area because it had become overgrown, substantially overgrown. And with the help of city staff and public works, they identified trees and rubbish that needed to be cut out and cleared out in hopes that it could be, the space could be utilized for this and a much better, more attractive entrance to Evergreen. But I think from the light to Evergreen Place is all Evergreen Place. And then the street from Evergreen Place right to the school is Central. I think that's the way the street works. For that scene.
The actual intersection at Central and Evergreen was just busy. It had a lot of directional signage there. And we felt that there would just be a sign glut at that intersection that it could get overlooked. So it's in a space all of its own and up off of the road where people are driving, not unless somebody's really going to be reckless. they wouldn't be able to hit it.
And if it suits, I would acknowledge that as a motion for council to approve the relocation of the sign.
That would be fine. Use that as a motion.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion?
What condition is the sign currently in? Second, has there been any discussion about getting a brand new sign? Because I've been noticing some of the dedications that we've had around the city are they're brand new signs, and it'd be kind of nice to have
And
a new placement have a brand new sign.
And going back over the emails between the city and DHR and whomever else, there was talk of restoration, but not a new sign. But it's something we can ask.
I think the sign's in reasonable shape. It's just the pole that was holding it, it had been pushed or pulled. It was leaning over at the time.
Yeah, it's still leaning, and it's rusted and just needs some TLC. And the city is going to be responsible totally for the landscaping and the maintenance of the space where the marker is going to be. And the county has agreed that they will clear the embankment on their sections at least twice a year.
I have a motion, and a second. Jim, did you need anything or? Okay. A motion, and a second. I'd ask for a roll call vote. Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Ms. Strawn.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
Mr. Betts.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I thought we were going to have the evening with no vote. No problem. That's good work to do. Next item on the agenda, Maury Service Authority, Mr. Alligood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Maury Service Authority Board meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday in this room at 5 o'clock. We expect to have a report on the wastewater treatment plant from the engineers come that time and presented to the board. And following that, we look to schedule the presentation to the local authorities collectively. So we're getting close, and hopefully that'll happen in October, even though no date has been firmly set. End of report.
Very good. Any questions for Mr. Alligood? Hearing none, I'll move into the mayor's report and have a couple items for your entertainment. I had hoped to be bringing you Tom Timmy's name for MSA consideration. He had applied earlier in the summer, I believe in July. When I contacted Mr. Timmy's, he said because of my lack of response to his application, he had committed to the symphony and the dive team at VMI with his schedule and was no longer available, but he did ask that we keep his application on file for potential future opportunities. And in going through the process, Dennis Ayers had also applied for the MSA, but in conversation with him, saw that the IDA probably aligned better with his schedule, and bring for you tonight Dennis Ayers' consideration to be appointed to the IDA for a term that would start immediately and end May 1st of 2026.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion, and a second. Any discussion? Roll call vote. Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
Mr. Ziegler.
Aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Ms. Strawn.
Aye.
Mr. Betts.
Aye.
Ms. Alexander. Motion carries unanimously. We still have, the RARO has changed their meeting time from evenings to noon. And when we appointed Troy Hall, the evening meetings worked with his schedule and the lunchtime do not. So he, in conversation with him, he is stepping down from the RARO board. And I don't have a name, don't have the application, but Chris and Aaron Terrapane approached them as a package deal. Told them we could only appoint one, and I'd let them decide who would apply, and we'd have the opportunity. But I anticipate for our next meeting that we will have an application from the Terrapines to be considered for RARO board membership. I reported at our last meeting that Chief Mann was coming from East Ghana. Wanted to talk about the concept of a sister city. She and her daughters came and had a great visit in Lexington. They were here for a very brief, probably close to 48 hours. And hats off to Jim, who gave a terrific tour of the community and also supported when a couple of things fell through on their schedule. But I had the opportunity to meet with her and President Dudley and Jeff Bubar, representative for General Winds, we met at the Washington Lee campus and talked about the idea of a sister city. And Chief Mann told us quite a few things going on and on her agenda for in her role as the chief of East Ghana. We haven't had any follow-up conversations, but the concept for a sister city is a very structured memorandum of understanding. And if we get to the point that one is drafted or contemplated, I'll bring you further greetings from Ghana and insights as that comes about. But at this point, in concept is something that is still in discussions, but nothing firm. But I think she was a terrific lady and inspired a lot of the folks that she came in contact with while she was here.
What did you look, what is it? What happens if we have a sister city? What does that do? I mean, I think it's like 260,000 people. I mean, like East Ghana, like what would that?
But we don't import 260,000 people,
I'm
but
just trying to-
I would encourage you to seek out the Sister Cities website. There's a variety of things that are available.
I'm sorry, you misunderstood me. You
Okay.
met with them for several hours and you talked about being a sister city.
Mhm.
I wasn't there. Anything you can tell us what that relationship would look like?
We met for 45 minutes. She read to us a prepared statement of things going on in Ghana that were priorities of hers, as I mentioned previously. And that was about the extent of the conversation. So she said she would really like to stay connected to Lexington. A lot of times it's done through education, and she looked directly at the representatives of Washington Lee and VMI with the expectation of their students coming to Ghana, which is something that's already going on at Washington and Lee. Stephanie Sandberg, who is the professor that's been heading this up for several decades, for the past, I think, 6 years at Washington and Lee, is eager to grow and develop the circumstance. There was zero conversation of what the expectations. One of the things she said is a goal of hers that has nothing to do with us from a financial or any other standpoint, is that in her community of 240,000 people, they have one high school. And she would like to build a second one. And there were some other things that she shared with the city manager as far as sewer, lack of sewer systems and things of that nature, and trying to get more infrastructure for their country. But Stephanie Sandberg, Dr. Sandberg, indicated that Charlottesville currently has a sister city relationship with Ghana, and said that could be a model if we wanted to pursue that. But if I had no communications with anyone from Charlottesville and not aware of what their memorandum of understanding is or any commitment. But from the 45 minutes that I spent with her, no commitments, no offers, no details, just the concept of getting to know someone from another part of the country, or rather another part of the world, to make the world a more peaceful place.
Oh, I had a question that's
Sure.
unrelated to this.
I'm only talking Ghana right now.
Fair enough.
Go ahead.
And related to us as a fiscal agent for, say, tourism, do we offer the ability to provide legal services for the fiscal? And I asked that in the sense of, Could,
Having someone help you write a contract for a new,
could be a
executive
contract for a
director?
new thing, could be,
the lease.
exactly, could
Sure.
be a number of issues. Do we,
My understanding historically is the executive director would lean on the city of Lexington attorney. Depending upon, for instance, if it were the Buena Vista property, they may work with the Buena Vista attorney. Being a regional board, they do not have their own, but as a fiscal agent, sort of cursory questions, the Lexington attorney was available. And the Regional Tourism Board has the latitude that if they felt they needed counsel for something, they could go out and seek that service. I think they'd still be under the rules and regulations for RFP or things of that nature.
so it kind of just depends on the situation, so to speak.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. If you all want just simple review of a contract with an executive director or lease, I think our city attorney would be fully capable and willing to look at that.
Thank you.
I want to say I feel like at some point in the past, there was some level of dispute and it had to do with a county business or something, and the county attorney became involved because of that unique
So it's
situation.
just very situational.
Correct.
Okay.
First question I would suggest would be to your fiscal agent. Contact city manager and see what direction we should go from there.
Thank you.
Certainly. And welcome any other questions you have relative to Ghana or the fun visit that we had with Chief Mann. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if our localities have multiple sister cities. But that's a question. If you don't know the answer, we'll look it up.
Well, like Charlottesville has 4, and they have a commission of appointed city representatives that work frequently with their sister cities, whether it be in Italy, France, Guatemala, and Ghana. And they've got representatives from K through 12, higher education, business, youth representation. So they've got 13 commissioners and a whole city area devoted to their responsibilities to help have exchanges, have subcommittees to fulfill the mission of the commission, to receive and raise money and accept gifts for sister cities. So I think that's why I just wanted to learn if you had talked about that, because you kind of said if a MOU was drafted, then it might come to us. And I was kind of thinking to myself, wow, if this is not something that our city manager can take on before we go to the trouble of drafting a MOU and get too far down the road, or if we need to ask Washington Lee for help
Sure.
to help stand up this commission or whatever it might look like, better to do maybe that on the front end before we get too far down the road. Because I think WNL did a great job initiating this, and Colonel Bubar gave a tour of VMI and Jim all of the city and took them to lunch. It was a great event, but just so that everyone understands, the benefits and everything.
Sure. And I guess filling in the blank, I don't know what Chief Mann's intentions are, other than she really wants to have a sister city relationship. There's no discussion of what that looks like. If she were to send us, as I mentioned to you, August 23rd, I got a letter saying, hey, I'm coming to town. I want to talk to you about a sister city. And that was on the heels of Stephanie saying in May that we ought to have a sister city, and was published, I think in WNL columns or something of that nature. So it all came about. I would not be at all surprised if the city of Lexington received an MOU from Chief Mann saying, we'd like to be a sister city and here's what we propose. I don't know that that'll happen. I'm not expecting it, but I wouldn't be surprised because of 240,000 people and the staff that she has at her disposal. We don't have. Nothing's been committed. Nothing's been obligated. It was a bit of a whirlwind, the 48 hours that she and her daughters were here. And while it was terrific and a wonderful experience, I'm not sure what Washington and Lee anticipates beyond Stephanie taking people on study abroad for May term, which is what's been happening. Apparently, talking with a couple of the students, it was a phenomenal experience to go there and meet the local folks there. And they were hosted by Chief Mann and her staff. And it was fantastic. It may not be anything other than that happens going forward, but at this point, the city's under no obligation, and it can be as much or as little. To answer your original question, what does a sister city look like? As much or as little as you want it to look like.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Certainly. Earlier this week, I stopped by the Rockbridge Regional Library and joined folks to celebrate Constitution Week and provide a proclamation recognizing September 17th through 23rd, which is recognized nationally as Constitution Week, and encourage everyone to reflect on the Constitution and the rights and privileges that we have on the basis of that information. Earlier tonight, if some of the council members seem a little wired and inspired, there was a early opening of Starbucks, which is having their grand opening tomorrow, 5:30. If you need a fix, they will be open and ready to serve you. And Bonnie and the crew out there that they have assembled to operate are wonderful. And if you've never been in that building before, its transformation is unbelievable. Having worked in that building for 6 years with 3 stories, it is now basically 1 story and looks nothing like the bank that I worked in for 6 years. So encourage you to go and welcome Bonnie and her team. There was also a ribbon cutting at the end of last week at Rah and a dedication of their grocery. And Mr. Smith was there as they celebrated. If you haven't been by Rah, I encourage you to do so. The operation there and the transformation of that building is amazing. And the things that they do in our community, especially with the grocery, are extremely significant. And lastly, Shenandoah Attic Victorian Parlor, which relocated from the Rockbridge building to the former Grands building, is in a lovely new space. They're thrilled and had their pastor come and offer some prayer and uplifting to open their new store, which was very exciting. So if you haven't been by to see Miss Debbie and Jerry and find something for Christmas, birthdays, or anything else, I encourage you to stop by beautiful store and new space that they're thrilled with, as well as Ladles and Linens next door. And unless there are any questions, that concludes my report.
Is that a permanent relocation?
For
Ladles and linens and.
technically, they have relocated to the Grands building while John Adamson renovates the Rockbridge building. And they his intention is for them to move back into their old space. However, if you've moved anytime recently, moving's not much fun. And the folks at Ladles and Linens and Shenandoah Attic both have indicated they really like the space they're in right now. So taking it one day at a time, but may very well stay where they are. But the original plan was to relocate for probably 18 to 24 months while the Rockbridge building is renovated, and then move back to the Rockbridge building. So, of course, the only thing permanent, death and taxes. Jim, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a little update for Public Works. Our Director, Patrick Madigan, spoke at the Lexington Sunrise Rotary Club, and he detailed several recently completed projects of note and additional projects that'll be upcoming in the current fiscal year to the club. The sewer, as Mr. Betts noted, the sewer lead at the tourism center seems to have collapsed. It's partially blocked and it's collapsed at some level. And Public Works believes that they can assist the owner in opening up that blockage. It may, of course, mean we'll be digging up that new pavement in front of the tourism center. But it was cameraed and there's just a collapsed line there. I don't know that it's exactly our responsibility, but we're going to assist and support that because the tourism center is there. From the police department, Corporal Lewis and Mr. Turner began the commercial driver's license training for the purpose of supporting learning opportunities with the police department, including camps and trips, et cetera, that students may go on for the police department or with the police department. The summer camp that they had last summer, sometimes school children get transported to Boxerwood or to the pool or somewhere of that nature. So rather than have the school go through that effort, we would have some of our staff as CDL trained drivers, just to be there if we needed them. Corporal Hartbarger participated in the critical incident training for instructors. Lieutenant Condry attended a first responder 911 event at Mary Baldwin. In the fire department, they provided a public education visit to Yellow Brick Road and hosted a visit from the Rivermont School in Fairfield. And they highlighted the importance of emergency services and first response for other emergencies in the community. They also provided flag displays during the ceremonies honoring Deputy Sheriff Bergdorf and Mr. Ronnie Slough, president of the Buena Vista Rescue Squad. Both Deputy Sheriff and Mr. Slough recently passed away. A Shift is participating in the annual helicopter training with one of the Carillion's lifeguard crews. The department responded to a bicycle accident at West Nelson and West Denny Circle. The cyclist was taken to the hospital with non-life-threatening injuries. And they also responded to 2 individuals trapped in an elevator at the VMI Corps Physical Training Facility, and they were extracted from the elevator. I would note that I often mention, and I think you've probably seen, that training occurs very regularly, both in the fire department and the police department. I think it's real important for city council and the community to understand how often our personnel is trained to stay current in the many activities and duties in both of those departments, which is why I repeat that sometimes and bring those to your attention, because the community should know that we do a great job of keeping those important public safety responders fully trained. I'd like to read one email I received today from Fire Chief Dickerson. I think it is representative of the wonderful work the fire department does among all city staff. It goes, Chief Dickerson, on August 11th, I was driving a 26-foot U-Haul trailer, a towing vehicle, and exited I-81 to go to McDonald's on east side of Lexington. In an effort to turn around, which was a bad decision in parentheses, I departed the asphalt onto a grassy area and ran afoul of a piece of steel sticking out of the ground. The only real fix was to cut this off at the ground level. Any truck maneuvering would have been a disaster. I believe the state trooper called out your crew. These guys were great, very professional, and knew exactly what to do. They removed the hazard and guided me out of the place. I owe them a huge thanks and so appreciated what they've done. And this was from Jax Waxenfelter from Fayetteville, Arkansas, who was on a trip from Cortland, New York to Panama City, Florida. And there were pictures attached to the email that he sent. And I just think that even though this was not a life-threatening event, it still changed people's lives in a very positive way, because sometimes that kind of response changes the outlook we have on the world from both the individual who received that support and from our staff who's able to provide that support because they have the training to do so, the time allocated for responsibilities such as this. So, it's not necessarily what we would see as typical duties of the fire department, but it's still very important. I'm pretty proud of those folks. So, couple other issues, as Mr. Betts said, the windshield survey housing grant was submitted, and Rockbridge Area Community Services is apparently exploring possible use of the opioid funds. If you might recall, funds have been awarded to localities across the nation for treatment and response to opioid dependencies. And many agencies now, including Rockbridge Area Community Services, are looking at what they can do to use those funds from Rockbridge, Buena Vista, and Lexington in our area to provide treatment or assistance to individuals who do have opioid dependency issues. So that's all I have, Mr. Mayor, and happy to answer any questions.
Maybe can I just highlight a couple things about Jordan's Point? We had a work session on September 12th. I know that we approved the minutes, but all of council attended. Only one member of the public, Jeff Fubar, showed up as representing VMI, but we had a tour from Patrick Madigan, Thomas Wagner, and then Jim was there and Jen were there. And we, all of council walked all throughout the park and was able to visualize the projects that could be undertaken, and projects are already being done. Of course, the walkway to the Gold Star Memorial, the bathrooms were repainted inside. It was pressure washed. I mean, there's all kinds of work being done. And so I just kind of wanted to highlight our work session. So when the public sees progress, maybe some improvements at Jordan's Point, we went and we saw the proposals. And then also just wanted to highlight also at Jordan's Point, 1 p.m. on Sunday, there will be the dedication of the Gold Star Memorial that coincides with Gold Star Family Day. And so, of course, we've all been part of that, but it's an exciting thing for Jordan's Point, and the city has really improve that area with the help of Mr. Bartenstein, and it just looks fantastic, fantastic. So wanted to highlight that at 1 p.m. on Sunday.
And highlight the effort led by, can't remember his first name, but Mr. Kaner.
David,
but
and son Jaden.
Jaden, thank
Mhm.
you.
Yep.
I keep losing Jaden. I can't keep wanting to say Jacob, but I know that's not right. So Jaden raising the funds and spearheading that particular site. Thank you for highlighting that. City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple little items, let you know what I've been working on recently. The last few weeks, of course, the amendment to the Spotswood Agreement and working on the Waddell Street Agreement, which I think we're now about to get across the finish line with that. I had mentioned to City Council previously the need to file some pleadings with the court to get the BZA members appointed. Wanted to let everybody know that's been taken care of. The 2 new members have been appointed, and indeed that order also confirmed the composition of the remaining of the BZA. So that's behind us. Been working on a handful of issues: procurement, Freedom of Information Act, looking at some contracts for city staff coming up. Depending on what I might have to do for the tourism board. In addition to that, Jim has asked me to look at some proposed documents or some proposed revisions to the governing documents for MSA. So we'll be looking at that coming up, coordinating with county attorney on that. Jen has sent me the letter from the auditor. So I have an annual auditor's update. Nothing significant there to report. So just always something going on. Of course, if anybody has any questions, you can always reach out and ask. And other than that, a few things to talk about in closed session, but not too much.
Very good. You prompt a couple things. One that I neglected to mention under my report is Saturday is Walk for Mental Wellness at the Skyline Trail at Natural Bridge State Park. Begins at 5 p.m. Activities in the Children's Discovery Zone, 6 o'clock community walk led by the Sheriff's Department. And if you RSVP, 8 o'clock wagon rides to the stargazing location. Enjoy s'mores at a campfire, which sounds lovely and very therapeutic. So encourage people to take care of their mental health and well-being. And also, my apologies for not acknowledging at the beginning of our meeting. We do intend to go into a closed meeting. Don't anticipate there'll be any action once we come out, but going in for legal briefing from council on some potential litigation and also contract related to city manager search. Ms. Alexander will read us into that in just a moment. But just to affirm also for folks, Jim, tomorrow, the time council will be meeting at City Hall at, or Janie, 12:30? 12:30 to meet with Ann Lewis. There's time in the afternoon for members of the public to meet with the individual who's leading our search with Baker Tilly. Again, Ann Lewis. She'll be here tomorrow from 10 until 3 p.m. And I think meeting with members of the public from 1:45 to 3. Very good.
Will our meeting with her include a closed session?
I don't anticipate it, or it's not scheduled, but if members of council want to talk about individual applications, we'll have the language there to read to go into closed session, which would be the primary or perhaps only reason we would go into closed session with the search director. Any other questions? If not, thank you all for being with us. Thank you for engaging in our community and the good things that you do. And we will be going into closed session. I'll ask Ms. Alexander to read us in.
Move that Lexington City Council convene in closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Code 2.2-3711A1 for the purpose of discussing and considering candidates for the position of city manager. Virginia Code 2.2-3711A7 for the purpose of consultation with legal counsel pertaining to probable litigation where such consultation in an open meeting would adversely affect the city's litigating posture. Virginia Code 2.2-3711A8 for the purpose of consultation with legal counsel employed by city council regarding specific legal matters requiring legal advice, and Virginia Code 2.2-3711A29 for the purpose of discussion of the terms and scope of a public contract related to the search for a city manager.
Second,
Thank you for that second. Roll call vote. Ms. Strawn,
aye.
Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Mr. Sigler.
Aye.
Mr. Betts.
Aye.
Mr. Alligood.
Aye.
I vote aye. Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
I'm really ready to go.